Hi everyone, welcome to Tech Tutorials 2K21. Very good afternoon. So in today's session, we are going to learn the concept of functions in C programming language. So I'll start with the introduction of functions and then why we need functions concept in C programming language and what are the different types of functions in C, and we can discuss about different categories of functions available in C programming language. Then what is a recursive function? How we are going to do the listing of functions in C program, and we'll see what are the different parameter passing techniques are there in C program, and how to pass arrays to function and how to pass the strings to function. So this is about a function concept. So we'll go through a different examples and try to understand the complete concept of functions today. So I'll start with the definition of a function. So simply we can say a function is a self-contained block of statements which can be executed for a specific task. So in C programming language, we are using at least one function like a main function. So that main function is consisting some set of lines of code. Means a block of code we have in your main function. In the same way, the function concept will come up with the user-defined functions which can be returned for a specific purpose. Suppose, if I am implemented a function which is user-defined for finding the average of given n numbers. So now that function is used only for finding the average of n numbers, it cannot do more than that. So that is the meaning of a specific task. So for what purpose you return your function, it can do only that. It cannot do more than that. So in C programming language, it must contain at least one function. So that is of your main function. And this is a syntax. So how you are writing the functions in C programming language. So it's simply consisting of 4 parts. The first one is a return type and followed by a function name which will take n number of arguments. So you can give any number of arguments, and sometimes that arguments it may be 0 also. And then the function definition we can provide it within a block of statements. So now we'll see why the functions are required in C programming language. So we know C programming is a modular language. So we can treat everything as a function in C programming. And these functions will make the complex programs we can see and we can understand very easy way, because we can't implement it as a single function. So we can divide the entire program into different parts. So that each and every part we can say as a function. So now it reduces the complexity. And when we make use of these functions, so we can easily avoid when we make use of these functions, then we can easily avoid rewriting of the same code multiple times in a C programming language. Suppose if I define one function, so that function I can use later in my program. Many times I required that function, so I cannot rewrite the code again and again. Whenever I required, I just call that function. So now that code I can reuse in my C programming. And we can achieve this reusability concept in C programming by simply using the concept of functions. And we can call the functions any number of times in a program without rewriting the code. That is also one of the advantage and the requirement for the concept of functions in C. And by using these functions, we can divide that complex program into multiple modules, so that whenever we are finding any errors, it is easy to debug and it is easy to understand and rectify the problems also. But here we have an overhead using the concept of functions in C programming. So that is not bothering about ourselves, whenever you call some subfunction from the main function, the controller needs to jump from one place to another place. That will be a little overhead with the concept of functions in C programming language. So we'll move on to what are the different types of functions in C. So this is the next topic. So the types of functions. So in C programming language, there are two types of functions, which is said to be a predefined functions and user-defined functions. So that predefined functions are the functions which is already defined. That means of that the functionalities is already defined by the programmer itself when they implemented the C programming language, and we just use those functions in our program for getting that functionality. We don't need to rewrite the code for implementing those functions, and such type of functions are said to be predefined functions, and these functionalities are given in header files. So whenever we want to use these functions, we have to include that corresponding header file into our program. Suppose some predefined functions we can take like ceil, floor, square root, getS, putS, printf, scanf, and all these are the predefined functions. So you can take all your string handling functions also are predefined functions. So we just use those functions because the functionalities is already defined. So we need not to write the code for that. We simply use. So for that we need to include the header files. So for example, if you want to use the square root function, we can include math.h header file. We want to use printf and scanf, then we can include include stdio.h. For getS, putS, we are going to include conio.h. So like that, whenever a particular predefined function we want to use in our program, we need to include the corresponding header files. But the second type of functions, that's what we are going to discuss today, that is user-defined functions. And this type of functions can be used to create our own functionalities in C programming language by the programmer, so that we can make use of it in a multiple times. So this function will reduces the complexity of a big program, and so that it optimizes the code. Because see, for example, if you are going to write one program and that program need one function 10 times. So if you don't use the concept of function, we can write the code multiple times in a program. Whereas by using this function concept, we can write once and we can use many times. So whenever we require, we need not to write the code again. We just call the function. So that is enough. So because of that, it reduces the code. So it makes an optimization of the code. So then move on to what are the different elements of a function. So elements of a function means, so we all know in C programming language, the C compiler can recognize only the main function. So it cannot recognize any user-defined functions. So in main function also we have two parts like declaration part and executable part. So the declaration part itself, it can declare all the things which are going to use for in our executable part in C programming language. So we have to declare anything, whatever we want to use in C programming language. For user defined functions also, it consisting three things. Like first of all, we need to declare the function so that the compiler can understand this is one user defined function which the user is going to use in their program later. So which consists in the function name and return type followed by some arguments. So that is a function declaration we have to do before your main function. So before we are going to write the main function, we have to declare the function so that the compiler can understand. And the second part, it consisting function calling. So we need to call a function from the main function because the C compiler can directly recognize main function only. It cannot understand other than the main function in C program. So what simply we are doing is, we are trying to call the user defined functions from the main function first. So that whenever the C compiler will reach that function call, it will switch the control from main function to sub function. So we can say that user defined functions are said to be sub functions. So now the controller will jump to a sub function and it will do the operations there. Again it get back to your main function. Suppose if I am come up with a real time example. Suppose we are at washroom and we are going to wash some clothes. So in meanwhile, so some other person on outside at door. So that person rang the bell. So what we have to do? We have to stop the working and then we move on that place to the door and we open the door and whatever the work we have at the door, we can do everything and we come back and continue with the remaining work what left it before we reach the door. So the same thing can happen with the functions also. So now your C compiler starts execution from the main function and it will execute line by line. So whenever it finds some function call, like it's a disturbance, so what it will do, it simply jumps from the main function to the sub function where it is defined, and then the functionality what you are given in that definition, that everything is going to be executed, and after completion of that work, again it return back to the main function and continue with the remaining statements and it is start execution from that. So that can happen, means the switching off from main function to sub function by the compiler can happen simply by this function call. And after that, this is must we have to do, that is a function definition. So this function definition part will consisting of the block of statement where we have to write for given a functionality to the functions. So now it contains an actual statements which are to be executed. So it is the most important aspect to which the control comes when the function is called. So when you given a function definition, so when your compiler will see the function call, it come to the function definition and whatever the statement you are given in that, it is going to be executed there. Hence, we must notice that only one value can be written from the function. So always we are trying to return some value to your main function if it required. So always remember, function will return only one value. It cannot return multiple values. That is not possible by functions. So it always return only one. So we'll see in brief about these three elements, like what do you mean by function declaration and how to declare, and how you are going to call a function and then function definition. So these are the things we are going to discuss now. So start with the function declaration. So I already said function declaration, it defines the name, return type and the function arguments in a program. So before we are using this function, we need to declare it outside of the main function. So before we start your main function, we have to declare the user-defined functions. So this is a syntax for declaring a user-defined function. So return type you have to specify. So return type means, so it will give you the information like whenever you return from subfunction to main function, do you carry any information back? If you carry any information, what type of information it is? Like it will be an integer or it will be a double, float, character. What type of data we are getting back from subfunction to main function, and that is defined by this return type. Whereas the function name is a user defined name. So you can give any name to your function. So that gives some meaning. And then in parameters, like we can pass in parenthesis. So brackets we can say parenthesis. So from this parenthesis we can pass the arguments or the parameters. So now you can give a semicolon for function declaration. So remember, for function declaration you can give a semicolon. For function definition there is no semicolon. For example, see, I am going to write one function. So which is find the largest among two numbers. So simply see here, I am passing two numbers num1 and num2, and I am using this function find large, which is going to find the largest number between number 1 and number 2, and it is going to return that value to my main function. So this is simply a declaration. And then coming to our next one is a function definition. So we can follow the same prototype, means what we are using at the function declaration, and you can use the same except the semicolon, and after that you can use the block to give some statements to execute. So this flower brackets, the combination of flower brackets we can say as a block, and we can write all the statements in that. So now here is provided some information about return type, what do you mean by a function name, and what is the argument list, and what do you mean by this function body. So return type, I already said, it defines what type of data can return back to a main function. So either you want to return an integer, floating point, character, etc. Whereas a function name, it defines the actual name of your user defined function. So which consisting some parameters. Means whenever we want to pass some information, so then we are going to use this arguments or parameters. So now these parameters again it consisting two parts, like we can specify what type of data we are going to pass, and then we can specify along with our variable names. So the next thing is a function body. So it is a collection of statements to be executed for performing a specific task in a function. So the body of the function will specify the number of statements which is used to provide the functionality of the user defined function. So you can write your main function and you can write your sub function. It doesn't make any connection between your main and sub functions. So your sub function is never going to be executed in your program. So you need to provide some connection, and that connection is provided by your function call. So what your function call? So function call is an important part of the C programming language. It is called inside a program whenever it is required to call a function. So function calling when we are doing, whenever we want to call some user defined functions, then we can use this function calling concept, and it is only called by its name in the main function. So we can provide by, means whatever the prototype it's having, we cannot use that entire prototype. We can simply call the function with their name itself, and we can pass the parameters of two functions calling in the main function. So this is the way how you are going to call your function. Like we can simply provide the function name, and here we need to provide a parameters which is said to be a actual parameters. So now we'll see what happens when you call a function. So when function is called in C programming language, what is happening inside? I already said that whenever you call a function from the main function, your controller will switch or will jump from the main function to your subfunction. So see here, this is your main function. So in this main function, I called a function called square. So square is my user defined function. So when I am calling this, my controller is directly jumps to the function definition. So this is my function call. So when this function call is occurs, my controller will jump from this location to this location and it will execute the statements which I provided in this function. And after completion of this, it again return back to my main function and it continue with the remaining statement which I provided in my main function. So we can say the functions with two different names, like the function from where you are going to call your subfunction, and that function, simply we can say the main function, is said to be calling function, and the subfunction is said to be called function. So now we are going to call the subfunction from the calling function, that is your main function. So you have to remember, calling function is always your main function, because always I invoke or else always I connect my subfunction from my main function. So all your subfunctions are called functions. So at the time of basic structure of C, we seen that any number of subfunctions we can write in C programming language, but we can write only one main function. So we cannot write more than one main function, but we can write any number of user defined functions. Those are your subfunctions. So this thing will happen whenever you call a function. So we'll see what do you mean by actual and formal parameters. So parameters is nothing but simply arguments which you are passing in your function, right? In inside of the function, what we are passed, and those things are said to be arguments. So these are, see, the along with my function which I am passing some value, and that are said to be arguments or parameters. So in C programming language, we have two types of arguments, that is actual arguments and formal arguments. So what do you mean by actual arguments and formal arguments? So the calling function means the main function. In the main function, whenever you call a particular subfunction, at the time of calling your function, you are given some values or you are passing some values. So such type of things are said to be actual arguments. Means the values or the parameters which you provided from your main function, and those arguments with your function calling is said to be actual arguments or actual parameters. Whereas the formal arguments or the formal parameters is nothing but the variables which you are declared in your subfunction. Okay, this is about actual and formal arguments. So when I am explaining through a program, so that I will explain you again where we are calling and where we declare function and how we are going to define and what do you mean by arguments and everything. Okay, so we have different categories of functions in C programming language. So that is depends on how the main function is communicated with the subfunction. So from the main function, it is going to pass any values to subfunction, or else the main function is expected anything back to the main function. So depends on this. Means it can give a value or it can take any return value. Depends on these two parameters. If I consider, the functions can be categorized into 4 types. So this is a categorization of functions. So this function, it will shows the communication between the main and subfunctions. So how these main function and sub function is going to be communicated with one to another. So that can be differentiated by these categories of functions. So there are 4 categories of functions. I already said, like whether we are given some arguments, whether the main function is returned back to any function. So depends on this. The functions can be categorized as 4 types. So that is a function that has no arguments and that has no return type. So you can take your main function and a sub function, and these two are just communicated, but never expecting anything from one to one. Means the sub function is never expecting anything from the main function, and main function is also nothing expected from the sub function. So whenever we have such type of communication is required, then we are going to use this category. A function that has no arguments, no return type. So I'll explain you a simple program for this. So I'll go through, so this is no arguments with no return type. So I just executed this program in my editor. So I just created one project. No arguments, no args. And here I'm going to copy that code, and then I'll explain you. The second I'll explain that entire code. So what do you mean by no arguments and no return type? So see, this is a simple example. So I will explain everything like what do you mean by function declaration as of now what we discussed. So that everything I'll show you in this example. So I said when you are going to use a user defined functions, so we have to declare a function before the main. So this is your main function, right? So before this main function we have to declare the sub function. So here you can find out the return type is void. So void is nothing but nothing. So void is void will says that it doesn't return nothing. I mean it doesn't return anything. It doesn't return anything. So now whenever the function is never returns anything, we can use simply a keyword void before your function name. So here my function name is even numbers. So by this function, this is my user defined function. By this function, I am going to display all the even numbers between 1 to n. Right, I am going to display even numbers between 1 to n. So this is my main function. So in that main function, I am written one printf statement. So that will say like welcome to functions concept. And you can see this is a function call. So I already said when you call a function, we simply give a function name. So need not to provide like void, even numbers like that. We simply provide the function name. And what is my function name here? Even numbers. So when I call this function, so I simply call even numbers. So nothing I can do with my main function. So simply I am calling, because if I didn't call my user defined function from the main function, it never executed in my C program. So simply I call. So main function, it doesn't give anything to your sub function. I'm not provided anything to my sub function. So I just call. So whenever this line the compiler can see, it will jumps to the function definition. So now see, this is your function definition. So this is a function definition. So function definition is means what? For what purpose we are implemented a function, and that functionality or we are going to write in a function definition. So what is my purpose? I want to print even numbers from 1 to n. So I am doing that task in my subfunction. So when I call this function, so now my compiler jumps here and it will execute the code which I am given here. So now here n is variable and I is also a variable. So I am using this n for taking the number, means from 1 to what number I am going to provide even numbers. So for that I am taken this n, and after that this I am going to use my for loop, because I want to take n numbers one by one. I want to take, and one by one I want to check whether it is even. If it is even, I am going to print on my screen. So that is my purpose. So now here by using this printf and scanf, I just read my n value, and after that I am trying to print all my even numbers between 1 to n. So this n value I am taken from this, right? So this 1 to percentile d will take an integer value from n variable, and after that this is my for loop. I start I with 0 and I is less than or equals to n, because I want to print all my even numbers from 1 to the given number. So because of that reason I am taken here I is less than or equals to n, then I plus plus. So for every I value I am taken a modulus operation with 2. If I divided every value by 2, my result is 0, then I think that is my even number. So whenever my result is 0, I am going to print that value here. Suppose for example, if I provided my n value as 5. So initially I is 0 and 0 is less than or equals to 5. Condition true. So it come inside. So it will take 0 modulus of 2. Yes, 0 modulus of 2, when we perform, the answer is 0. So it will print 0. And after that I get increment, it becomes 1. So 1 modulus of 2 is equals to 0. Condition fail, because 1 is not an even number. So it doesn't print 1. And after that I get increment, it becomes 2. So in such that it is going to be executed for n times. So every time it will take the value and it is trying to performing a modulus operation with 2 and check whether the remainder is 0 or not. If it is 0, that value is going to print it on my screen. So this is my function definition, that is even numbers. So I just execute this, and after completion of this statements in my function definition, again the compiler return back to the next line of my main function. Suppose see for example, after I am displaying this, I want to show that whether it come back. For that I am written here a simple statement. Controller came back to main function. So which indicates that whenever you call this function, so the compiler will jumps from your function call to function definition, and after completion of this, again it return back to your main function and it is going to execute the next line of your function call, right? So what this program is going to do, so it will take n value first and it will generate even numbers from 1 to n, and after it return back to your main function and it will print controller came back to main function. So I just execute this program. So now you can see welcome to functions concept. So before I am calling this, I have one printf statement, that is welcome to functions concept, and that is printed here. And after that what it will ask me, see all of you. So now this is my function call. So whenever I call this function, so my controller is jumps here. See, if it is not jumped, then it is going to print this value, right? But it doesn't give a printf statement. So your controller is jumps here and it will ask you enter the value, enter the number. So here I provided my number as 10. So now that 10 is given to a loop, and this is going to be executed for 11 times, because from 0 to 10 I am included. So now I just click on enter. So now you can see the even numbers between 1 to 10. So here we have the even numbers between 1 to 10. So all the even numbers between 1 to 10 is printed, that is 0, 2, 4, 6, 8 and 10. and after that it return back to your main function after your function calling. Because of that reason, it will printed the next statement which I provided in my printf statement, that is controller came back to main function. So I hope you all understand. So how we are going to declare, call and define a functions in C programming language. So here I cannot pass any arguments because I am in the concept of function has no arguments. So here you can find there is no arguments and no return type. So because it doesn't return anything, I am using void here. Okay, so we'll move on to the next category. So that is the second one, function that has no arguments but has a return value. So now you can see the main function, it doesn't give anything to your subfunction, but the main function expected some value from the subfunction. So that is the meaning of this. I cannot give anything from main function, but the subfunction can give some value to main function. So that is the meaning of function has no arguments with return type. I'll go with so function has, the second category is function has no arguments, return value. Yes, function has no arguments and it is going to return some value. So I already said we can return only one value from the function. So I cannot return multiple values back to my main function, so that I never going to print all my even numbers from my subfunction to main function. I can return only one. Because of that, here I am taken one more example. That is, after I am finding even numbers, I am going to add those even numbers and I am trying to display that value here. So for this is a program. So here I am using the same example so that you all can understand better the differences that can happen with all these categories. So this is my function declaration. So we all know. So now my function has no arguments. So I didn't pass any arguments here. You can see no arguments here. But what my function say, it can return. What type of function it can, what type of value it can return to main function? Integer. Right? So when the subfunction is going to return some value to the main function, so we need to declare a variable and then we are going to call the subfunction. We have to remember, whenever the function has no arguments but it takes some value return back, so simply we are going to print the output from the main function, not from the subfunction. Okay, we are taken output from the main function. So for that, this is simply a function calling. So I already said, whenever you call a function, we just give a function name. Because this is having no arguments, I cannot pass any arguments here. I simply call the function and here my function name is even sum. Because I need to find all even numbers between 1 to n. And after I am finding all my even numbers, I just summing up of all the numbers and display the answer in my main function and give that answers to my main function. So here I declare one variable e_sum, that is even sum. So for this even sum, whatever the value I am return from my subfunction, that is going to be assigned and then that value is printed from my main function itself. So now see, so this is my function definition. So you can see the prototype is same. See here int even sum and brackets open and close. And here also we can write the same way. So remember, the declaration, the definition, the calling all must follow the same prototype. Otherwise the compiler cannot understand. Right? So we can follow the same prototype. So for even sum, so here I am taking two variables. One is for taking n value and I is for using in my loop. And even sum. So we know whenever we want to perform a sum At least we need two values. For one value, I'm not going to take a summing operation. So because of that reason, I'm taken one value variable and initially assigned with 0. Right? So after that, I just read my n value and the same thing I can do. So instead of I'm printing my even numbers, if I find the number is even and that I'm going to add with my even sum. So initially even sum is 0 and first I value is 0 and it is an even number, so 0 plus 0 is added, my answer is 0. Right? And after that, again I get increment. So 1 I'm getting, so 1 is not even number, so it never going to add. And now next I get incremented, it becomes 2. 2 is even number, so 0 plus 2 is added. The answer is at yes. So now what we have to do here, we want to return a value from subfunction to main function. So now for that I am returning a value es because my es variable is having the summing of all my even numbers. So now this value is going to assign to my esum. So now after this, my control is came back to my main function. It is going to print the sum of even numbers from this esum. So I just execute this program. So now it will ask me, see here. So in this my main function, so I just call my subfunction directly. So in that subfunction only it will ask me what is the n value. So I provided n is 10. You can take any value. So when I click on this, so now you can find out the answer is returned by your main function. It never returned from the subfunction because I didn't write any printf statements here. So no printf statements are in subfunction whenever you are going to return answer from the main function. So the answer I am taken from the main function. The sum of even numbers is, so the value I am getting from esum. So we know the even numbers between 1 to 10 is 2, 4, 6, 8 and 10. So we can add all these values. Now we get the result as 30. So this is function with no arguments and return type. And the third category is function that has arguments but no return type. So now the main function and the subfunction is going to be communicated with one to another. Here the main function will give some value, means whenever we call a function, we need to pass value from the main function. After that, we doesn't take anything back to the main function. So whenever we are not taking anything from the subfunction to main function, we are trying to display the output from the subfunction itself. So that's what you need to remember. So now the next concept is function has an argument but no return type. So I'll go with the same example. Here also I'm trying to display all my even numbers, and now you can find out the difference is in previous example when I explained the same. So it doesn't take any arguments. So I simply using void my function name even sum, and simply here I didn't pass anything here. Simply these are the brackets. But whereas here function can take a value but it doesn't return anything. So it doesn't return anything, because of that my return type is void. And it can take a value. I am passing one integer value from the main function when I am calling the function. So see, now you can find out the difference between previous function calling and this function calling. So in previous function calling, I am simply given even numbers. I didn't pass any value there. Whereas in function has an argument and no return type, we have to pass the value from the main function. And whatever the value you are passing from the main function, when you call a function, so that value is given to your function definition. See here. Now you can see the prototype is same. Void even numbers int m. Void even numbers int m. So the declaration The definition must having the same prototype. And here, now I need to pass my n value, because here also I am written a program for printing even numbers from between 1 to n. So only the difference is, in previous example, the n value I am taken from my subfunction itself. Whereas in this, I am taken my n value from the main function and I am passing this n value to my subfunction. So this is the reading of n value, and after that, that n value I am going to pass to my main function. So this is in my main function. When I am calling this function, I am just pass my argument. So now this function is having one argument, and whenever I am calling this, so now the compiler jumps to the function definition. So here we have the same statements like I am going to print the even numbers between 0 to 10 or whatever the value I am provided with my n. So now I just run this program. So now it will ask me the number. So now you can see where this statement, it is at main function. So if I am given my main function, the value of n is 15. So now this value is taken and that value is given to my subfunction. So when I just click on enter, so now you can see the even numbers between 1 to 15, 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 and 14. So from where I am going to print all these things? From the subfunction itself, because I didn't take any value back to my main function. I just simply calling. At the time of I am calling this function, I am passing my n value. So that is the third category. And the last category is function has an arguments and function has a return type. So now we can have the fourth one, that is we are given some value from the main function. At the same time, we are expecting the value back to the main function. So because of that, so here I am using even sum, because I already said we can return only one value to main function. We cannot return multiple values. So because of that, I am taking this example to demonstrate this. And here it is my function definition. So now you can see, so it is going to return a value integer. So because this is my return type, it specifies, it return an integer value, and even sum is having argument. So it will say function has argument and return type. So in my main function, I need to pass my n value as usual, and I want to take the even sum is also from my main function. Because of that, I am taken one variable, and at the time of calling function, I just pass my n value, and I am going to return, I am going to print my answer is also from the main function itself. So because of that, you are making your function call like this. We are going to assign, because we want to take something back, right? And this is a definition. So this is the way how you are going to find even sum. So I already explained in previous example. So here things are changed. See here, from the main function it will ask me like what is your n value. So now I am provided 20. So now that 20 value is passed to my function, and it will take the values from 1 to 20 and it will find all the even numbers between 1 to 20 and it will sum up. Now I get my value as 110. So now you are finding that your main function will give you the value to your subfunction. After the subfunction is executed, your main function is expected answer from the subfunction. So this is function has arguments and return type. So depends on the requirement of the user, like whether he want to pass some value from the main function to subfunction and he want to return back any value to the main function. Depends on that. user requirement, we can use any one of the category of all these function categories. So we have four categories. Function has no argument, no return type. Function has no argument, return type. Function has argument, no return type. Function has argument and function has return type. See, these are the four categories of functions. So it depends on the user requirement. We can use any one of this category to implement the functions concept. So the next concept is parameter passing techniques. So we said we have two types of parameters like actual parameters and formal parameters. So now what this parameter passing techniques will say is whenever we are calling the subfunction from the main function, how you are going to pass the values to your subfunction, whether you are simply passing the value or else we can pass the address. So it depends on this. The parameter passing techniques are of two ways, like we can give call by value and the second one is call by reference. So in this parameter passing method, values of actual parameters are copied to a function's formal parameters. So whenever we are using a call by value, so the compiler will keep two copies, like it's having an original copy as well as it will create a duplicate copy. So original copy we are getting from the main function itself and the duplicate copy is maintained at the function definition. So because of this we are maintaining the copies of the same information. Whenever we make some modifications in your subfunction, that is never affected to your actual parameters. So that is which is given in your main function. Whereas the second type is call by reference. So here in this reference, instead of passing values, we just directly pass the address of the variable. So whenever we give an address of the variable, it simply take the same variable reference. Means it cannot create any duplicate values again. So it cannot make a copy. See, simply you can use that original copy. So whenever the memory is constrained and whatever the changes we made, we want to update it directly, then we are going to use the second concept like call by reference. Or else we want to keep the original data as well as the modified data, then we are going to use the call by value. So this is like by call by value. So in this parameter passing model, values of an actual parameters are copied to functions. Formal parameters and the two types of parameters are stored in different memory locations. Like actual parameters and formal parameters, they will keep their own copies. So any changes we made on inside of the functions are not reflected in actual parameters of the caller. Because I already said in call by value we have two copies of information. So whatever the modifications we did in your subfunction, that is going to be updated for your formal parameters. It doesn't affect it to your actual parameters. Whereas the call by reference, so both the actual and formal parameters refer to the same location. There is no different memory locations. So for formal and actual parameters, we have the same memory locations. So whatever the changes we made that directly reflected and affected to your actual parameters itself. So that is the main difference between this call by value and call by reference, and depends on how we are going to handle the memory, we can use any one of these mechanisms. So I will give you an examples for call by value and call by reference. So you can see that. So for that here I am going with an example of swapping. So I can pass the values from my subfunction from my main function. So subfunction is going to use that values and it is going to swap and return a value at subfunction itself. So now you can see this is no return type and arguments. So this is a category of no return type. Why I said no return type? Because we return void, and then with arguments, and here we have two arguments, and both arguments is of type integers, right? So this is my function declaration. So I will show you how we are going to implement the swapping concept using functions. So this is a swapping. So here my function name is swapping, and in general whenever we want to swap two numbers, we need a temporary variable so that we can keep the first original value into that temporary variable, and then we are going to copy into the second variable. Because so whenever we have two glasses and one glass consisting water and another glass consisting milk, so when you want to exchange, so directly it is not possible because this glass consisting water and this glass consisting milk. So if I didn't pour this water into some other glass, so I cannot find water again. So what simply I am doing, I am taking one empty glass and I can pour my water into that empty glass. So now that empty glass, now it consisting the water, and after that I pour this milk into that water glass, right, which I just made as an empty, and then what I will do, so in a milk glass I am taking the extra glass which I filled with water, I pour it into this milk glass. So that was a simple concept we have for swapping. So I am using the same logic here. So here because my function can take arguments from the main function, so I am taking values a and b from the main function itself. So user can give a values of a and b, and this is my function calling. So now you can observe that there is no assignment variable here because I am not returning anything back to my main function. So I simply call. So at the time of calling, I am passing the values of a and b. So this is my actual parameters. A, B are my actual parameters. M and N are the formal parameters. So see, M and N are the formal parameters. So whenever I am using the concept of call by value, so what call by value will do? It will keep a copy of AB separately and MN separately. Right? So now you can print AB here, it never changed. Whatever the values you are taken to A and B, and that is going to be taken here. So here it is my function definition. So my function name is swapping. It will take two arguments. So now the value of A is copied into M and the value of B is copied into N. So here I am taken one more extra variable, that is a temporary variable. So before I am going to swap, because this will do the swapping operation, before I am going to do the swapping operation, I just trying to print the value of M and N. So when you print M and N values before you are swapping, so it will consisting the values of A and B itself because it makes a copy, and then the AB values are copied into M and N. And after that, I am just doing a swapping by using this logic, like in temporary variable, I can keep my M. In my M variable, I can keep my N. In N variable, I am again going to keep my M with temporary variable. So after the swapping, so my two numbers are swapped, and that is going to be displayed like this. So now I just execute this program. So now it will ask me the values of A and B. So I'll provide it like 15 and 89. So after I'm swapping, I need to get a values like 89 and 15. See? So the numbers before swapping, 15 and 89. And you can observe that before swapping, whatever the values I am provided for my A and B, that is going to be printed with my printf statement. Now see the number before swapping, from where I am going to print it as M and N. So the value of A is copied into M and the value of B is copied into N. So after swapping, now these two values get interchanged. So now you can see the first variable consisting 89 and the second variable consisting 15. So this is a swapping operation. So here I am using the concept of call by value. So I'm going with the same example, the swapping example for the call by reference also. So here instead of I'm passing values, I can pass the address. So when I pass the address, so now I need a special variable, that is a pointer variable, which can keep these addresses and later it can take the values from that particular variables. So I'm demonstrate that call by reference with the same example, and here also I'm going to do a swapping operation. So now you can find out the difference because when I'm doing a swapping operation, in previous example, so the compiler keeps a different values. Because of that, the actual and formal parameters is having the same copy. So whereas I am using this call by reference, so the same memory locations is given to m and n also. So these are the pointer variables. When I am using pointer variables, I can use asterisk symbol before the variable name. So everything is same. The logic, how you are swapping and everything is same. But here only the thing is, instead of I'm passing the variables, I'm passing the address of the variables. Right? Instead of I'm passing the variables, so here I'm passing the address of the variable. So now you can see here. So swapping is my function. So it doesn't return back anything to my main function. So now you can see I'm printed a values from main function itself, because after I'm swapping also, it is going to be affected with the same locations. Even I'm print m and n or a and b, both are same. So because of that reason I'm printed like this. So in my main function, I read a and b values before I'm calling my swapping function, because it makes changing of my a and b. Right? So because of that, I'm calling the swapping function. I just print my values of a and b. And after swapping also, means after I'm using this a, b values, see at the calling of function, here I'm passing address. So now you can find out this difference between the previous and this one. When I'm calling this function, I'm using the address here. So if I'm using address here, my arguments, it must be a pointer variables. So that's what you just remember. So now I'm using a temporary variable. From this temporary variable, I make a copy, because these are the pointer variables. I'm using the pointer references like this. So now just execute this program and both will return the same. So I can give values for A is 20, B is 45. So before it is 20 and 45, and after it is 45 and 20. So now you can see I'm printing those values with A and B only. So before swapping, A is 20, B is 45. And after I'm using the call by reference concept, so the same memory locations is provided for your M and N also. Because of that, the whatever the modifications is made, that is reflected my original values. See, and now the answer I am going to print from A and B itself. So now that things are changed. So this is a call by reference. So these are two parameter passing techniques. So one is call by value and another one is call by reference. And the next concept is recursive function. So what do you mean by a recursive function? So now I think you all understand what is function and what do you mean by calling and what happens when you call a function and everything. So coming to this recursive function, these are some special type of functions, so which can call itself again and again. Suppose see for example, we are going to find a factorial of some number. So what your 5 factorial will say? We can find out 5 multiplied with 4 factorial, then only we are finding the 5 factorial. So for finding 4 factorial, again it call back the same function, right? And it will take 5 into 4 into 3 factorial. So for finding the factorial of a given n number, it is going to take like n into n minus 1 factorial every time. So now in such situations, we are going to use the recursive functions concept in C programming language. So simply we can say a function can call itself. So this is the difference between previous topic and this topic. Whenever you say the functions concept, always we are calling from other function. Like from main function, we are going to call your subfunction. So in this way we are calling. How many times you call, then only you go and execute that many of times. So otherwise it can execute only once. So whereas the recursive functions, the function definition is going to be executed multiple times in order to complete the task. So here I am given a simple example. I am going to print sum of n numbers by using the recursive function. So this is an example for recursive function. So I will explain you a little bit later. So here I am going to do summing of n numbers. So I want to take n value. Suppose if n is some 10 or something. So I'll start with 1 and I can add 1 plus 2 and later I can add the resultant of this value with the next value. So for adding sum of n numbers or for adding 1 to n numbers, we are doing the same thing again. Means we are simply adding. Internally we are going to adding multiple times for providing the sum of n numbers. So here I am using function with return type and function with argument. So the fourth category of functions I have used here. And in this main function, so I am taking number and result as two variables. By the number I am going to give the n value, and after that my result I am taken and sum of number. So whatever the number I am given, that will be given to my function calling. So we know like why we are using result is equals to function call here means we are expecting integer value back to your main function. So because of that we are taken like this. And then after finding the sum in the subfunction, and that answer is returned by this, and then that is going to be printed from the main function. So now I'll explain you. So in this subfunction, so sum of it will take n as an argument. Suppose if I am given 10, 10 is my argument. So now if n is not equals to 0, so I am not provided my n value as 0. So I provided some value like 5, 4, 3, whatever it will be. So now it will take that value and it is going to find the sum. So initially if I am provided my n is 5 for example, 5 plus, again it calls the same function, sum of n minus 1. So now 5 plus sum of 4 I need to find. That is the meaning of this. Right? Else, suppose if I am provided my n value as 0, simply I can return my n is 0 and my answer is completed. I just execute this. So now it will ask me enter a positive integer. So I'll provide my value as 5. If n is not equals to 0, no, n is 5 and then it is going to call. Else I am going to return simply whatever the n value. Why it always prints sum is 0 only. Result equals to sum of number. So I am passing my number as 10. So it will take number is copied here. If n equals to this is my main function and here it is going to be n. So what simply I can do n plus else part is printed, right? The else part is printed. N sum of none. Because I need to return value. So what type of value I need to return? Missing something here. So this part will take miss. returns n value. So in function definition, if n is something and it is going to be and this function is going to call again. So 5 plus, okay, and this needs to be repeated. Yes, because of this it is to be repeated. And then is a nesting of functions. So in C programming language, it is possible to call the functions in nesting way. That is, we can call one function from another function. But we cannot define one function in another function. So as like nesting concepts we can discuss in previous. Like we can take a nesting of loop is nothing but one loop we have another loop. So for the functions, we can say nesting of function is nothing but we can call one function from another function. Such type of things are said to be nesting of functions, but we cannot define one function within another function. Define and calling is different. Right? We cannot define one function within another function. That is not at all possible in C programming language. But we can call from one function to another function as a nesting way, and that is said to be a nesting of functions in C programming language. So now this is a simple example. Now you can say this is your main function and these are the sub functions. So function hello is one and function world is another one. So I just demonstrate this. So now you can understand. So now you can see. So here it is one function and this function name is hello, and here it is another function. This function is hello and this function is world. Okay. So we have two functions. One function name is hello and another function name is world. And simple program it is. Now you're in your main function. So I have one printf statement like controller is at main function, and after that I'm just taking one function calling here. So that is function hello I am calling. So when I am calling this function hello, so now my controller is jumps here and it is going to print hello function is called from the main function. And in hello function I am going to call the world function. So when I am calling this world function, my controller is jumps to function world and it is going to print like world function is calling from the hello function. So this is how we are going to do the nesting. So for that I am going to, okay, so double quotations and this like not it will take. So I can provide here also double quotations. Here it is. So I just run this. So now you can see controller is at main function, so which is printed from my main function. And when I am calling function hello, So the hello function is said to be like hello function is called from the main function. And then for function world, it is calling from the hello function. So that's what means it will give you the nesting. So from here it is executed, from here it is executed. So this is nesting of functions in C programming language. And after that we have the concepts like passing arrays to functions. So before this functions concept, we discussed arrays and strings. So now how we are going to integrate that arrays and strings concept with functions. So we are going to discuss now. So passing array to function means whenever we want to pass any argument, and here instead of passing some variables, we are going to pass array means as an argument, right? So for function we are passing an argument as a array. So see, I will explain you. So here I am taking a one-dimensional array because we have a different types of arrays. So one-dimensional and multi-dimensional. So because of that, I am going to explain you how we are going to pass one-dimensional array to function and how we are going to pass multi-dimensional arrays to function. So I'll explain the two topics. So here simply I am taking one array. So from that array I am given some values, and those values I am going to perform sum in my subfunction. So you can write your subfunction definition before your main function or after your main function. So you can do like that also. But always C starts execution from the main function. So but you don't write your header files anywhere. Okay, but you can start your header file at the beginning only. And this is my function declaration. So I have a function sum. So now this sum function is going to return a floating point value to my main function, and it will take single dimensional array as an argument. So here I am taking one array, and this is one dimensional. I didn't specify any size here. So how much length of my array I am going to pass from the main function, and that size is taken consideration, and it will add that many numbers. So in my main function, so this is because of function can take value and return value. So I'm taken one variable result. So from this, after I'm finding all the sum of floating point values, I'm going to display with this variable, and this is my array. So just I need to give my array values from my main function. So I is a variable which I used in my for loop. So enter array elements. So I0, I less than 5. When I am given I less than 5, even my array size is 10. It is able to take only 5 values from 0 to 5. So it does take only first 5 values. So scanf. So by this scanf I am read my array values, and then I am calling my function. So my function is sum. So need not to give your array like subscripts. You simply give a array name. So num is array. So now your function is take an argument as one dimensional array. And after it return back to main function, what is the answer I am getting from my subfunction? That is going to be printed from this result. And in my subfunction, I just define my function functionality. That is here I am taking one variable sum, and I initialized with 0, and after that I am using my loop, and I'll take a values from 0 to 5 here. No need of you just give 5. Okay, so for that you can give here plus I, no, I plus plus. So it can take like I plus plus. So now it will read the values from index 0 to 4. So 5 values it will read, and then it performs the sum, and the answer is available at sum variable itself, so that I just return my sum variable back to my main function. So I execute this program. So now it will ask me array elements. So I need to pass 12 elements of floating point. So I am provided like this. So these are the 5 values I passed. Now you can see my result is 223.12. Okay, so this is how we can pass one-dimensional array to a function. So we can also pass a multi-dimensional array also. So for that I illustrated with a two-dimensional array, and simply I am going to find out the transpose of a matrix, and then I am printing that value. So when I am going to print a multiple values, it is not at all possible by the function. So because of that, here I am using the category like function can take arguments but no return type. Okay, it can take argument from the main function but it cannot return anything. So here I am doing transpose of a matrix. So we know transpose of a matrix is nothing but the rows and columns are interchanged. So for that here I am using two-dimensional array. Because of the time constraints, I didn't type each and everything. So here see, when I am given void is nothing but it doesn't expect anything from your subfunction. And transpose is my function name, and it will take a two-dimensional array. So I am passing here the two-dimensional array. I specify my size as 2 by 2. So in main function, so I am taken a variable, and you can see this is a local variable. So the lifetime of this variable is within your main function only. So this variable and this variable is not same. Both are different. So for differentiating, we are given a different names actually, and we can also give like this, but your compiler can differentiate the scope of those variables. So now you can see this is a two-dimensional array, and we know for reading two-dimensional array we need two for loops. So for that I am taken ing variables. So here I am asking the user enter the values for two-dimensional array, and simply here I am calling my transpose of a matrix function. So here I am calling function transpose, and there I am passing my array name num. And in my function definition, so transpose will take a two-dimensional array as an argument, and here I need to transpose the matrix, that is rows and columns needs to be interchanged. So because of that reason, again here I am declaring two local variables ing, and here I am taken one array which I need to save my answer. So trans of 2 by 2 matrix I will taken, and transpose of a matrix. So this is a logic. Trans of ij equals to num of ji. So we know like I always represents the row and j always represents the column. So now I am taken row column and I am interchanged with column row. So this is simply a logic here, and I am printed that value from here. So this backslash and I am given for matrix representation, we want to see the output. So I just compile and run this program, and it will ask me the array elements. My array size is 2 by 2 matrix, so I need to provide 4 elements. So now you can see in my first row I provided values as 2532, and second row I provided value as 4152. Now you can see it will be in row will become column, and this row will become this column. So this is a transpose of a matrix. So this is the way how you are going to pass a multi-dimensional array to functions. And the last concept is how you are passing string as an arguments to functions. So as like a array as a numerical arrays, and we can also pass strings as an arguments to function in C programming language. So instead of numerical array, here we are going to pass string, that is character array. So here I am doing reverse of a string. So the string I am passing from the main function, and whatever the string I passed from my main function, and that I'm going to be reversed in my sub function, and then I printed the value from there. So for that, this is a simple program that illustrates how you're going to pass a string to function. So this is also a very simple example. So we know the concept of strings. So here see, this is void. So my function name is reverse string. So by this reverse string, I'm going to find out the reverse of a given string. So my string name is str. So in my main function, I'm taking my string with size 50, and whatever the size I have, I may not use the entire size. So because of that, when I'm reading the string from the keyboard, so stdin will say we are taken input from the standard input, and fktest will function is going to take the string, and it will read up to the size of the string. Means whatever the size, means how many characters I can enter through my keyboard, and it will consider that as the size for the string. And here I simply call my function reverse string, and this is my function definition. So after reversing the string, I simply use strrev. So because I am using this function, so I can take this header file hash include string dot h. So after reversing of this string, I just print that string from my subfunction. I am executing this. So it will ask me enter a string. I'll provide like welcome. So now you can see the string is reversed. So after reversing the string, now you can see EMOCLLEW. So this is a reverse of a string. So this is about the functions concept in C programming language. I hope you all can understand, and I'll provided another different examples in my channel. So if you are really interested to learn more examples about this functions concept, you just go through. Thank you.